Doctors, nurses, hospital executives, and all the many other people who work in the medical system follow the news just like the rest of us. When they get false information from news reports, it can endanger people's lives. That happened recently. The media created mass confusion. In this case, it was about what hospitals are allowed to do if a pregnant woman is at risk of imminent death. Today, a doctor joins me to explain.
This isn't like fringe media. This is like newspapers of record, if you will, right? Trump administration ends emergency abortion requirement for hospitals. Ends the requirement. And that isn't what happened.
Meanwhile, big news organizations are also facing complaints about a switcheroo they've been doing on Iran. There's something I'll help you understand about this. They suddenly decided to pay attention to a specific source of information that they were ignoring before. This is what happens inside newsrooms when agendas, ideologies, and a rush to jump on a bandwagon lead the way instead of facts, context, and thought. At stake in this mess they're making is the safety we all may have or not have in the future. Plus, on a happier note,
little lads and lassies, every age and every size, gathered here together neath the grandest flag that flies.
It's July 4th week. I'll share some patriotic music you've probably never heard, not just old stuff like that. There's a new one. Your messages about the music on this show are awesome. I'm so glad you like. I have a patriotic offer for you today, too. And this show is for everyone who supports the fight for truth. I'll be welcoming folks in a bunch of countries. All that and more coming up on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. Welcome to all those of you who are returning and to the new folks just joining us. Maybe you just learned about this show in one of the op-eds I did or my latest piece for The Contrarian, or maybe you were watching when I was on Substack Live with Mike Pesca. Thanks, folks. It's so great to have you here. For those of you who don't know, my name is Josh Lebs. I spent 20 years in mainstream media, 10 on NPR and 10 on CNN, where I became lead on-air fact checker. And throughout all that time, I saw how the media got so incredibly much wrong. So many reports would not pass the same fact-checking standard that we were using to look at politicians, but no one did anything about it. I can't stand that. We desperately need trustworthy sources of truth. And speaking of trustworthy, I don't ask you or anyone to blindly trust me when I say things. That's why I send out a newsletter with each episode, multiple newsletters, and you can see links, videos, information, all kinds of stuff. And you can get in touch with me. If I get anything wrong, I want to do segments here called I Stand Corrected. And the best way to contact me is to become a paid subscriber to the newsletter. Folks who do that are supporting this show. They're getting exclusive content. And they can message me directly. For everyone else, there is a form you can find at my website, joshlebs.com, JOSHLEVS.com. Both these systems are designed to avoid spammers and haters and bigots and make sure that I hear from you. And I'll tell you, these systems are working really well. I love hearing from you all. And speaking of these methods, I want to welcome people who are signing up for the newsletter from all over the world. Subscribers have joined us from Mexico, Colombia, Algeria, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Romania, Norway, Sweden, Portugal, Thailand, Australia. Maybe I'll get to meet some of you in person as well. I travel and do speeches and events about the things I cover here on this show and about the media in general. Anyway, you'll hear more about that later in the show. For links about everything I just told you, check out the show notes or my website, or if you're already on a platform called Substack, just go to They Stand Corrected. You'll find it there, theystandcorrected.substack.com. All right, enough business. Let's jump right into this. On this show, I've talked about the fact that people are overwhelmed with content from literally the moment they get up until the moment they go to sleep. So most of the time, a quick headline or update is the extent of what people can hear about any big news story. That is why those headlines, those quick updates are so important. They have huge impact. And it's why mistakes like this can be dangerous. Here's a clip from MSNBC.
The Trump administration has rescinded a Biden-era memo that required all hospitals to provide emergency abortions to mothers when their health is in danger.
That's not what happened. But if healthcare providers and patients think that's what happened, women can find their lives on the line. I know someone who has been working to get the media to stop messing up this story. Dara Kass is an emergency medicine physician and professor of emergency medicine. She's also an advocate of making the healthcare system work for everybody. She explains what actually happened here. It involves something called EMTALA.
EMTALA is a law from 1986. It's called the Emergency Medicine Treatment and Labor Act. It is a law that was passed in order to compel hospitals to take care of patients when they show up at the door without regard for the ability to pay. Before this, patients would show up to private hospitals. They would ask them if they could pay or if they had insurance. They would deny them care while they were, let's say, bleeding from a gunshot wound or in active labor. They would transfer them, or they would really push them out the door, sometimes wheel them down the street in a stretcher or a wheelchair, or put them back in their car. And then they would go to a county hospital where they would get care. So what EMTALA said was, if you're a Medicare receiving facility, hospital that takes federal dollars, you have to have a minimum standard of evaluation. And so all patients that come to your door, you have to do a medical screening exam, and you have to stabilize them before you discharge or transfer. And if you're going to transfer them, so let's say that you don't have the capacity to care for them, it has to be done in a way that meets minimum standards. So you have to transfer their records. A doctor has to know that they're coming. You have to send them in a vehicle that is appropriate for their level of injury. And so all it did was create a standard, a floor, that patients who presented in an emergency were evaluated, got to the level of care they needed without first asking if they had the ability to pay or if they had insurance.
If you have a need for life-saving care, and that includes terminating a pregnancy, because you can die from pregnancy. So that is part of providing that initial care.
In the EMTALA statute, no single procedure is identified. So it doesn't say you have to take care of every heart attack patient and they have to get to a cardiac cath lab or they have to get clot busting medication. It says stabilize patients. For the first time ever with Dobbs, with the reversal of Roe, we saw a single procedure that could be used in a life-saving moment be illegal in certain states. And states had not worked their stuff out. So they hadn't said, okay, everybody coming into our ER, if their pregnancy is threatening their life, you can terminate. Everyone hadn't put that on paper yet. So the federal government stepped in and said, we're going to clarify that all procedures that save lives, including this newly illegal or certainly questionable procedure, is covered under EMTALA. And that is all the memo said.
This was what the Biden administration put in guidance in order to avoid having local jurisdictions try to say that this was an exception to EMTALA, right?
Yes. It was an attempt by the Biden administration to remind mostly providers on the ground and hospital systems that your duty to treat is still prevalent, continue to save lives, and we have your back. If you do something that is questionable, we're going to say, we as the federal government believe this is still part of your mandate.
Okay, jumping in here. So here's what happened next. The Trump administration pulled that guidance. They did not pull the law. The executive branch does not have the power to do that. They pulled the guidance that was emphasizing what the federal law already said. But you wouldn't know that from a lot of these news reports that were giving a very different picture.
One of the headlines, right, the Washington Post. I mean, this isn't like fringe media. This is like newspapers of record, if you will, right? Trump administration ends emergency abortion requirement for hospital. Ends the requirement. And that isn't what happened. EMTALA is the law of the land. That is where the first level of miscommunication was. Everybody was like, oh my God, the Trump administration is telling women to die. They didn't do that. Now, they certainly made it less safe to be pregnant in America when they overturned Roe v. Wade and made it so that you can get different care in different states. But with this one memo, they didn't infuse new harm other than remove the protection that people felt by the memo existing in the first place.
Doctors, nurses, other clinicians who work in hospitals, they hear the news also. You know, we sometimes tend to think, well, they'll get their own guidance. But like, if that's what they think, based on what these reports are saying that then fly around on social media or whatever, that could have on the ground effects on whether these people get their treatment because the news messed up.
It gives this false sense of permission or even mandate to Republican-led states or to physicians who are concerned about being prosecuted that they should not offer emergency stabilization if it involves an abortion or termination of pregnancy. But it also may cause patients to not seek emergency care because they're afraid they're not going to get the care they need, or if they do, they're going to get judged or questioned for it. And so when I think about it as an emergency medicine doctor, I worry that if you live in a Republican-led state, you are all of a sudden saying, wait, I live in Missouri with a total abortion ban. I am having bleeding in pregnancy. I'm going to drive now to Illinois to get care because I know the Republican-led states are allowed to let women die, and I'm going to go. However many hours of that drive might make the difference between you living and dying. And so I think the entire process of having to redefine emergency health care in the face of bans has created an opportunity for misinformation, including in the media.
If a state passes a fetal personhood law, then can't they take EMTALA and say the unborn fetus is also a patient? So maybe EMTALA is not clear anymore.
In an emergency, there is no medical possible way to prioritize the needs of a fetus over the needs of the mother. If a person is coming in and they are hemorrhaging and you need to stop that hemorrhage and the termination of pregnancy will stop that hemorrhage, that is how you save the mother's life. You cannot save that baby and not work on saving the mother. That doesn't work. In fact, we have a whole slew of science and medicine and procedures that we do that stabilize the mother without respect for the fetus at all, because even focusing at all on the baby is to distract from the more important entity, which is the mother. And I'll give you an example of that. In a trauma, so a car accident or a gunshot wound, a mother comes in and she is 34 weeks pregnant. So she is pregnant enough that that baby could live on its own if it had to be delivered. You don't even pay any attention to that pregnancy until you try to save that mother. And if you can't, you then do an emergency C-section, both to give that baby a chance to survive on its own and give that mother one last chance to take away the pressure of supporting another human by taking them out. That only works post viability, meaning that weeks, let's say 24, 25, we would never even attempt that earlier.
There's one more complexity here that I want you to help me with, because it seems to me that there is a place in which fetal personhood can run up against EMTALA. If a woman goes into an emergency room and it seems that she needs a termination of pregnancy, needs an abortion to survive, and someone who works there will say, well, that will definitely mean you killing the unborn fetus. Can't they then use that to say, well, if we don't do this abortion, there might only be a 1% chance that she'll survive, but that could also save the baby. So let's not give her the abortion and cross our fingers and hope she survives, and then effectively letting her die. Like, doesn't that subjectivity allow these places to say, well, under EMTALA, we don't have to give her this care because there's still the tiniest chance that she might survive anyway. So let's just hope, and maybe they'll both survive.
In an emergency medicine, we have this gut instinct. We kind of know when you can't turn back. My entire career is built never getting to that moment and just acting before the point of no return. And what these laws have done is make us get so close to that line, but never over it, because we don't want to be wrong. I mean, if 99% of the time patient's going to die if they don't get the intervention, but 1% of the time, that's all of medicine. And so that's why, again, the EMTALA thing is ripe for confusion, because we want physicians to act in an emergency as early as possible. We don't want them to be confused about their requirements.
Were you able to get through to the media on this when you saw false things? Did anyone change their reporting?
Certainly within social media and digital media, we saw a lot of the headlines moving towards rescinding the memo. EMTALA is still the law of the land. And even then, the administration put out a second letter that specifically said EMTALA is clear and the law has not changed. Women will receive care for miscarriage, ectopic pregnancy, and medical emergencies in all 50 states. And this has not or will not ever change in the Trump administration. So did we get through to them? I think so. I think that they heard us. If I got to you, the media, and Dr. Oz, I think my job here is done for the day.
If you're wondering why she mentioned Dr. Oz in there, I'll explain in a bit. Coming up, concrete proof that the media picks intelligence reports to tell you about that meet its agenda.
And now I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Josh Levs.
We are blessed to be able to have a speaker this evening who speaks with a lot of heart.
An outstanding author, a principled and groundbreaking journalist, a really engaging speaker and thinker,
broadcaster, journalist, and host of They Stand Corrected, the podcast fact-checking the news. Thank goodness.
Josh spent 20 years reporting for NPR and CNN, where he developed unique expertise on nonpartisan fact-checking. He has been called Truth Seeker in Chief.
Josh has won multiple Peabody Awards, Murrow Awards,
and awards from the AP, from the Society of Professional Journalists, the National Association of Black Journalists, and more.
His book, All In, was published by HarperCollins and won the Nautilus Gold Award for promoting positive social change. He has spoken to the United Nations, Congress, Google.
And of course, I think is very cool, won a debate at Oxford.
He launched his podcast and newsletter called They Stand Corrected to provide listeners with the truth in a world of disinformation.
Clearly, he is a much-needed voice during these crazy times.
It's my pleasure to introduce Josh Levs to you today.
Please welcome.
Please join me in welcoming Josh Levs.
I love getting out there and meeting people like you. It's such a great opportunity to answer your questions and discover more about listeners to this show and potential listeners too. If you're interested in working out something in person or online, there's a form at my website, joshlevs.com. That's JOSHLEVS.com. You'll find a link in the show notes. Just click bookings. Several days after the U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, a new narrative swept across all the big mainstream media.
The Trump administration claimed it, quote, obliterated Iran's key nuclear sites, but CBS News is learning that may not be the case. A preliminary intel assessment finds U.S. strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities over the weekend only set back the country's nuclear program by a few months.
That was CBS, but everyone was saying this, that a preliminary assessment indicated that kind of limited damage, unlike what Trump was claiming about the facilities having been obliterated. Here's more from that CBS segment.
According to 3 sources who have spoken to CBS News, this preliminary assessment, which was conducted by the Defense Intelligence Agency, indicates that these nuclear sites that were hit by U.S. bombs and missiles this weekend were severely damaged, but were not destroyed, and that it will take anywhere from a few months up to a little less than a year for the Iranians to get back to work.
All these reports in big mainstream media basically said the same thing, that there was definitely damage, but that the operations, particularly at a site called Fordo, are so far underground that they remain largely intact. In the reporting, you hear these terms a lot.
This is a preliminary assessment based on signals intelligence, based on satellite imagery, and so things could still change.
That's another example of something I've talked about before. The media throws around terms without explaining what they are. Signals intelligence involves interceptions of what people are saying, so most likely, in a case like this, interceptions of Iranian officials. I have been looking into this, and there's something that I have not seen the media talk about or even ask about, but to me, it's the most obvious thing that they should be asking about. How is it possible to know how much damage was done or not done at Fordo, this site so far underground? I've been reading about this and studying this. There are satellite images. Sometimes there are seismic readings that can be used and other technologies, but I haven't seen any proof or any sign that it's really possible to know what's still functional underground until Iran begins digging out from all that rubble. I've also been asking some military experts about this in case there's something I'm missing here, and they say they're not sure either whether it's possible to know this stuff. Meanwhile, there are critics of the media who say that mainstream news organizations keep trying to find the most negative angle about the United States and also Israel. People say after the attacks happened, first by Israel and then by the United States, the media was saying, well, really, wasn't this even necessary? Maybe Iran wasn't close to having nuclear weapons. And now the new take is, watch out, Iran can still do it. So people are pointing to this kind of hypocrisy. And one clip that has been making the rounds is this from CBS. Secretary of State Rubio was trying to help the host of Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan, understand that something she was asking about was missing the key point.
Are you saying there that the United States did not see intelligence that the Supreme Leader had ordered weaponization?
That's irrelevant. I think that question being asked on the media, that's an irrelevant question.
No,
they have
that is
everything
the
they need
key
to build a
point
weapon.
in U.S. intelligence assessments. You know that.
No, it's not.
Yes, it was.
No, it's
that
not.
The political decision had not
I know
been
that better
made.
than you know that, and I know that that's not the case.
That is another example of an administration official pointing out something that the media itself should be making clear. It is true, most intelligence reports did not find Iran having ordered the final step, the actual creation of nuclear weapons. But a bunch of analyses did find that Iran was pursuing them with uranium enriched at 60%, which you only do for weapons. I talked you through a bunch of this last week. The media should be making that clear, not a government official. Now, some of this stuff becomes murky. People's takes on what the media is saying or not saying overall, what they're seeing or not seeing. But in a case like this, there is something we can look at that is objective, concrete, unquestionable. Here goes. Remember what you just heard CBS say there?
This preliminary assessment, which was conducted by the Defense Intelligence Agency.
The Defense Intelligence Agency is one of multiple intelligence agencies that the United States has. If the term sounds familiar to you, it could be because I talked about it last week. The U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency said recently that while Iran almost certainly is not producing nuclear weapons, it has taken actions that reduce the time required to produce sufficient weapons-grade uranium for a first nuclear device to probably less than 1 week. The Associated Press reported on that as well, and they said experts said it could then be months for a working bomb. I was pointing out that the media has been leaving it so unclear how close Iran was to a bomb. In the wake of first Israel's attacks on Iranian nuclear sites and then U.S. strikes, you should have been getting clarity on what the intelligence actually showed. And especially for a U.S. audience, but also for a global audience, learning what the Defense Intelligence Agency said was really important, but it's barely been getting any attention. Here's how I know that for sure. I have tools that I use to search the news. One of them that allows me to search all the big TV networks. So I looked at their mentions of Defense Intelligence Agency. When it comes to this new reporting on a preliminary report that was leaked, all right, so not even an official finding, but someone or multiple people inside this agency leaking this preliminary thing that says not that much damage was done. When it comes to coverage of that, you see all these mentions of the Defense Intelligence Agency in the big media. So I looked before that. Were these same media pointing out what the Defense Intelligence Agency said about Iran being probably less than a week from weapons-grade uranium? Were they pointing to that? And the answer is no. Right? When I'm searching this stuff, the references to Defense Intelligence Agency disappear before that. And it's similar in print media. I have these tools that let me search text pieces. I looked at the Associated Press. Now, as you heard me say there, the AP did report on what the Defense Intelligence Agency had said, but that line was inside a more extensive report. And since this new preliminary thing was leaked, all of a sudden, the Defense Intelligence Agency has been all over the AP and cited in tons of headlines, which is what way more people see. So, long with the short of it here, when there is this preliminary report, the Defense Intelligence Agency is something that the media wants to tell you about over and over again. But when it came to an official report that the agency itself stands behind that showed you how close Iran was to weapons-grade uranium, they weren't telling you about the Defense Intelligence Agency. All right, one more thing on all this. As you may know on this show, I don't talk about Fox News a lot because they don't really pretend to be mainstream. Their political bent is obvious. MSNBC is the same thing on the left, but I do talk about them, and here's why. I've mentioned this before, so I'll just say this quickly. One reason is that mainstream news organizations call out lies in right-wing media, but they don't call out MSNBC. Also, MSNBC is part of NBC News, which is technically supposed to be mainstream. So anyway, I do talk about MSNBC here. They had on an analyst named Rick Stengel. He's a former journalist, of course, and what he said here is ridiculous, but I want you to focus on what the host says to him along the way. Her name is Katie Tur.
Why is it a foundational issue for Trump that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon? Why is this something that the U.S. should be involved in? Why are we allied with Israel?
He says because they chant death to America.
I went to Iran in 2014. These young guys were chanting death to America. They finished the chant, and two young men came over and said, "Are you American?" I said, "Yes." "We want to welcome you to our country. We love American culture and love American movies." They wanted to talk about all these things. Iran is the most Western nation in the whole Middle East.
Everything about that is wrong. Here's what a news anchor should say at a time like that. It's not just about chance. Iran is a danger to the West, including the United States. Every president has said this for decades. Democrats, Republicans, no one has even questioned that. Iran is the chief sponsor of global terrorism. Iran-backed groups killed U.S. troops last year at a base in Jordan. Actually, that's something I need to get to. A bunch of early reports said it was the Houthis, which I've mentioned on this show, but it might have been another Iran-backed group in the region that did that. These are the kinds of things any journalist hosting a program should be ready to point out. Also, this insanity about Iran being Western, the way Iran is designing its government is as non-Western and non-democratic as it gets in the world. Iran has been using technology to search the streets for women who dare to break the headscarf rule, and it has killed women, killed dissidents. Actually, you know what? Two of the best movies I've seen in the last few years have been about Iran, made by Iranian filmmakers, showing the hell of living there under this regime. One of these, they had to physically smuggle out the actual film. I'll tell you what, coming up, I will let you know how you can discover ways to see those movies and more for free. Healthcare workers do so much that's so heroic. And most of us know what a difference a great nurse makes when our loved ones or we ourselves are in a hospital. I've experienced that myself many times. But the medical system is a mess. And a lot of nurses want you to know what's really going on. There is an organization called Nurses United for Healthcare Integrity. It's highlighting stories that hospital executives would rather keep quiet. All this group is asking of you is that you check out their website, read some of these stories, have your eyes opened to the reality they experience every day. Be sure to use my unique link. Thanks to a sponsored partnership, you'll be helping support They Stand Corrected, also for free. So it's a double good deed. Find the link in the show notes or newsletter. Learn about these frontline defenders of healthcare integrity.
Hero of power, hear my call. Standing 10 feet light, I'll never fall. Win every fight, I meet the fire. Rising up through the empires and the fire. I am the hero, warrior of light.
Earlier in the show, you heard a mention of Dr. Oz. That's because he is now head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Because going from being a real doctor to being a TV quack pushing fake medical solutions to a failed Senate campaign and supporting Trump leads to a prize like that. I don't understand why people want jobs like that. They sell out and kiss the ring of a leading candidate in any party just so they can end up being put in charge of a department, even though they have no experience running a big organization like that and don't even usually understand how it works. Are people so thirsty for a feeling of importance and power that they'll do that? Why? Someone help me understand this. Meanwhile, as I record this, the media's hypocrisy on the Iran stuff is getting even worse. New analyses are out from the Defense Department and elsewhere, and they say that the damage done to Iran's nuclear sites was severe. Most of these reports are on the record, unlike that leaked thing. The Trump administration is calling out the media, especially the New York Times and CNN, which did the same thing I was talking about before. And news organizations are rejecting the complaints from the Trump administration. They're saying, no, we pointed out that report we were talking about was preliminary. But no one's challenging them on what is provable here, that they jumped all over that leaked preliminary thing while having given little or no attention to the official report from that same agency about how far along Iran was toward nuclear weapons. The media picks and chooses what to fixate on based on its agendas. Before the break, I mentioned movies. I saw these two movies. They're both great. One is called There Is No Evil. It's a collection of 4 separate films, all of which highlight the hell of living under the Islamic regime in Iran. It starts off with what seems like a mundane day in someone's life, and then you get to the key part and you're like, whoa. Anyway, this film was smuggled out of Iran so that it could be released to the world. The other one I was referring to is called No Bears. I saw both of these for free. I see tons of movies for free. I also access top news agencies for free so that I'm not giving money to legacy media that keep failing us as a society. You can do that too. The information on how to do that is available to paid subscribers at my newsletter. So here's what I recommend. Take 1 month. Halt all of your subscriptions to failed legacy media. Try getting the full version of my newsletter instead. It's cheap, and count up how much money you're saving. People keep telling me they're coming out ahead, big time. I love that. The very low rates are set to a patriotic level, appropriate for this July 4th week. You'll see. And speaking of patriotism,
We pin our hopes on young America. You keep the nation great and grand. You hold a future, young America, in the hollow of each tiny hand.
you all send me awesome messages about the music on this show. I have fun picking it for you. This is from 1916, Young America, sung by the Peerless Quartet. And I'll take you out today with Young in America by Jesse Villa. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. To Americans listening who stand for peace, freedom, and democracy, happy July 4th. I will see you next week.